yeah, as an actor, you're in service of the thing that's bigger than you, which is the story.
Mm-hmm.
And to get the recognition from the guys that actually went through it personally and they give you the thumbs up is a beautiful thing. And actually it's a relief.
Yeah.
Because you haven't screwed up their legacy.
Everyone just saw the last episode of Masters of the Air. It definitely packs a punch. It's been on Apple TV Plus since March. What kind of reaction have you guys been getting from people who have seen it?
The whole show?
The last episode.
Oh, the last episode in particular. Well, for me personally, it made me cry. There were so many beautiful moments, not only personally as an actor in the show and like wrapping the whole thing up, but you know what Nate goes through and what he has to see, and then what my character sees, and those guys, Buck and Bucky, reconciling together, and Anto and Raph going up in the plane for the first time. I thought that was a really beautiful moment. It was an emotional journey for me, and it was a beautiful way to wrap it up.
It's so sad that he died fairly young, Bucky.
Yeah.
It is. After everything that he went through, that he survived all that, and then...
Yeah, I mean, to go through the war in the way that he did, and that was actually part of the way that I played him was because he died when he was so young. There was almost this thing that propelled him through life, this energetic personality that took life by the horns and enjoyed every second of it, even in something as atrocious as the war. And yeah, of course it's sad when people die young and leave kids, young kids. Yeah.
And then Nate, what have you been hearing? What's the reaction for you been since the finale?
Well, one of the things that's special about working on a show like this about real people and about real events is that, and especially in terms of World War II, lots of people have personal connections.
Sure.
So, you were approached by family members of people who maybe are in the show or have had someone who flew, and it sort of takes it to another dimension, right? That was always true when we started this. There was this feeling, this sense of connection to that story, to those people, right? It brings it to another level. There's a certain sense of responsibility there. And then to actually be able to shake the hands even of some of these veterans who were able to watch the show, and to have their story told, I mean, that's a rare opportunity in our line of work. So it's special.
There was two veterans. One was, I think, 102 and one was 101. And the 101-year-old said something, and he turned around and said to me, "Don't worry about him, he's just a kid." And so they kept that banter going, as they still do. And it's
That's
a really astonishing thing to see.
All right, let's take it back to the beginning. Tell me just sort of your origin story with these roles. What appealed to you? Why did you want to play not just real people, not just heroes, not just war heroes, but World War II heroes?
There was something, there always has to be kind of like an intuitive sense of connection with the character, right? Where you feel like kind of drawn into their story, into their world, into their mind. I was, of course, really blown away by Rosie's just the details of not only what he went through, that he chose to re-enlist, right? That he saw, that that he witnessed the kinds of disaster that he saw in the air and kept coming back. And then at the same time there was something about him that was so warm, and the way he led and the way he was with his men. There wasn't this kind of, he wasn't hard on the surface, even though he could be incredibly focused in the plane, right? He was so he had a kind of ease to him that I thought was really beautiful and made me sort of curious about stepping into him.
He had amazing fortitude. The fact that he would come back and re-enlist to put himself in harm's way like that, it's really unbelievable.
Yeah, it's almost kind of unfathomable, right?
Yeah.
Like when you learn something like that and you learn about the kind of, what it would, if you really take a step to think about what he was seeing over the months that he was there, right? And then to say, I want to come back for more, right? Like a lot of our show deals with the kind of the physical nature of the trauma, right? Of the impact of sort of going up, witnessing, a kind of horror that mankind had never really seen before, right? Area warfare, and then coming back down, and the question is, are you going to get back in the plane or not? And for Rosie, who ends up playing 52 missions, right, gets to 25 and says, the thought of going back home just isn't, it's not an option for me, right? Meant that there was a sense of honor and duty that was actually really simple and distilled for him, but so deeply embedded, right, that he just couldn't fathom going back home, and to try and sit with that, and trying to just do justice to that kind of a choice was no easy thing.
There was a period when he went 3 days in a row, right?
Yeah, his first 3 missions. I mean, he shows up in, I think, 43, and he ends up, he was back home. He was training gunners. He flew for a long time before he ever saw combat. And then once he was over in England, his first 3 missions were some of the most devastating of the whole war. So it was just, all of a sudden, just all at once. And the way the series tries to sort of like lay that out with his introduction, we have that sort of moment halfway through the series where I ask for advice, right? Because you were the guys, like, Bucky and Clevin were sort of the masters, right? It was like, do you have anything to say? And it's just like, try and get through it. Like, how do you sit with that, right? And then try and get in the plane. Somehow he did it.
Obviously, there's a lot of preparation that goes into playing these roles. Starts with doing the boot camp, simulating what's going on in the air. But can you also talk about some of the smaller things that you did to research and get into character?
Well, it always starts off with an image for me, and the image that I had was of Bucky. He grew up in Manitowoc, Wisconsin, right on Lake Michigan. And I had this idea of him looking out across that lake, which is a sea, basically, so big, and thinking, what am I going to do with my life? As a young man who's going to university, and then this war happens, and he has, like what Nate says about Rosie, has this inherent thing inside of him that he wants to do good and wants to help. And so he joins up before Pearl Harbor, and becomes one of the best pilots. Yeah. And him and Clevin are 2 of the best pilots in the business, and find themselves in a position of power within the Air Force, the Air Corps as it's called, sorry. And really it was just that image that was the first thing, and then what he went through and his personality and how expressive he wanted to be. And there was a naivety to him. I found that he thought that maybe this was going to be okay. This was going to be easy. It says in the first, I love the opening scene because it's him and Clevin, and he's saying, I'm going over there to do some observation missions, and It's all going to be good. And then it's a hard cut to the plane literally barreling down. Yeah. And he has to go down and he has to save someone's life. He has to stitch a guy up. And so I guess the question that really was the through line for me up until the changing of guard moment that Nate's talking about is, what does that do to a soul? This long day's journey into night where you have to find this thing inside of you to get up in and go back up into that plane and watch your friends die. Right. Watch your friends fall to the ground and their parachute not open and be cut to smithereens by flak. And then on top of that, he's also dropping bombs. He's he's the other side, and he knows that he's killing people that are civilians. And so what does that do to someone's soul? And really, I mean, the drinking that he goes through and then the way that he abuses his body in that way is he's just trying to keep that canoe straight. He's really just trying to keep everything on the straight and narrow and somehow get through this experience. And he's having an existential crisis in the middle of World War II. It's not a good place to have that, But also he's fighting the good fight, and without people like him, we wouldn't be here today. And, especially in Europe, we wouldn't have the lives that we have. So I'm so grateful to him that he was able to do that.
Especially coming up on the anniversary, or we just passed the anniversary of D-Day.
That's right,
yeah, really.
But for him, it felt there was a moment that felt Shakespearean because almost like Macbeth, where he can feel the blood and he can see the blood on his hands, and he doesn't know how to deal with it. So he drinks and he goes out and he just to get back into that plane and lead those men.
And then, Nate, when you're doing research on Rosie, do you have contact with his family? Like, how do you get into embody that character?
Luckily enough, I did. So Dan, Rosie's son, is pretty involved in the 100th Bomb Group network, and they have meetings and the families get together and talk and share stories, and I'm trying to sort of keep that legacy going. And I met Dan. He happened to be in England while we were shooting because the 100th Bomb Group now has turned into like an aerial refueling unit. And they named one of their planes Rosie's Riveters, and so Dan was there at the sort of unveiling of it. So I got to meet them, and it's funny. Like, you think you're gonna sort of like have a bunch of questions, like, oh, what was your dad like? What did he like? Things like this. But if I've learned at this point, sort of, it's better to just kind of like take in the essence of the person, right, and see how they are. To see him with his son, right, Sam. I learned more about kind of the man I was playing by seeing their connection, right, than anything. I mean, he did a series of like interviews. Dan, sat down with his father that I was, that are on YouTube, and I was able to watch them. Just talking about his dad, asking him about his life, and there was even one video I remember that was like that clarified things for me. There was like a. He was on stage in Colorado accepting a medal, and it happened to be his birthday, and all of a sudden in the middle of this very formal ceremony, they bring out a cake and they give it to Robert Rosenthal at age, I think he was like 79, and he's just stood on stage and everyone sings happy birthday, and it kind of zooms in on him, and there's a very vulnerable moment, and you're like, whoever that guy is, like, that's the guy I need. It's funny how things like that just surface, and then they sort of make their way into, what you're trying to do.
Yeah. And Callum, I know, like, in terms of, I know that you took dance lessons, right, with Austin. Did you do them too, Nate, or were you that?
I think I did maybe take one.
He did.
Just admit it. It's okay.
And he can groove.
You studied vintage baseball games. Yeah. So.
Well, yeah. I mean, first off, I mean, to your point about the dance lessons, and we had elocution lessons, and we had the boot camp and the flight training, and these guys really, Gary Getzman and those guys at Playtone and Amberlin, set us up to succeed. It would be stupid not to enjoy the things that they're laying on. The production value was really probably the highest that most of us are ever going to experience. It was second to none. And then on top of that, personally, Johnny Egan was obsessed with New York. He'd never been. He was obsessed with the Yankees. He'd never seen them play. So he would listen to them on the radio religiously. And so I listened to all these games which were online from 1936, 37, 38. Gillette was a main sponsor at that time. I can remember that. And just really to find the cadence and the essence of the time. And I learned about baseball too. I was talking to my brother earlier, and I was like, the rules are easy. They're not actually. And please don't ask me to explain them. And the other thing you said was
of the dance.
Oh, and the dancing. Oh, and Damon Runyon. So he was obsessed with Damon Runyon, Guys and Dolls. That book he read religiously to the point where he had this like strange cadence to his voice. He'd like altered his voice, and actually in like Crosby's book, Crosby didn't really like Egan. And so there was something about that I would take on board. And I don't know, did Rosie like Egan?
I think, yeah.
That's a no. So like, I don't think they liked Egan that much, but Egan was the leader. He was the man. He was the person that when he went down, it was like, well, holy shit, we can all go down.
Right.
And all of those things that just put into the pot and stir it and then see what I would come up with. But yeah, the baseball listening to was fun.
Go Yankees, since we're in New York. Obviously, you guys have a close bond, and it's been a few years since you've even wrapped it. But what made this production special because you do have to form this, no matter what they thought of each other, you do have to form this friendship right away.
Well, you know, one of the things that was cool about the series is that, you know, the crews, right, are kind of were the heart of the 100th, right? So it was like you flew with the same, it was the same group of 10 in every plane, and we ended up having to shoot it that way too, right? Because, you know, it's us and there's a co-pilot in the, you know, in the bay, there's all the other people on board. So these are the guys that we ended up spending all this time with. All the actors who were part of your crew became the people who you filmed with. So those kinds of bonds were kind of in there already at the start, because it's such an important part that we wanted to get right, because it's such a part of the life of the base and of the story we're telling, and it happened pretty naturally just as a result of, you know, all these guys being grouped together. Yeah,
and I know that you and Austin developed a very close bond. Also, you're trying to get him to move overseas. I don't think it's going well, but
no, I didn't ask him to do that. I would love him to, though. But actually, just to answer your other question, because I think it's important, we're honoring these men.
Of course, yeah.
And that's actually the thing that was the most beautiful thing about this job. I mean, the thing that we got to do, and the scope and the grand scale and the historic television and joining that legacy, but honoring these men. And you don't get to do that every day.
Of course. I want to talk to you about two specific scenes that we saw in the episode. The first one, Nate, is the one of Rosie visiting the concentration camp and seeing the aftermath of it. Can you talk a little bit about filming that scene and what effect that had on you? Yeah,
of course. You know, that's a scene that I had known when we started shooting was going to be sort of a big day, you know, and it was sort of it was a difficult combination of sort of, you know, going into sort of my own Jewish family history and sort of like making sort of connections there that I had never really been asked to make before, and talking to my family and hearing stories that I'd never heard before about my family and my great grandfather and his journey coming to the States and leaving his family behind, and sort of taking that in and sitting with it, right, just to kind of you know, bring that to the fore in a way to connect to the events that unfold there. And then, of course, you know, the scene itself is one of kind of slow comprehension, right? It's a person who's walking into a situation that they don't know what they're going to see, and slowly piecing together the bits and pieces of the scale of the atrocity, which at the time was true, right? Because you know, America and the soldiers, especially in England, you know, were aware of sort of the camps to an extent, right? But it wasn't until later in the war that we really understood just how, quite the scale and the nature of it. And that scene is kind of like a little bit of a distillation of that, right? It's like this man, you know, this Jewish man walking through and saying, "Oh, these are my people," right? And for me, that as a question of just, you know, and having to kind of, you know, go through that, it was difficult, but it was satisfying from a kind of like a human point of view.
Of course.
I thought Nate was amazing in that whole sequence. From landing on the ground with the Russian soldiers and the arm and the physicality, I thought he was really beautiful in that whole part.
It is. And then, yeah. And then, Callum, the scene where you're raising the American flag, what goes through your head when you're filming something like that, or who goes through your head?
I mean, a lot of things. It was the end of a long shoot.
Yeah.
And I think that there's like art imitating life, and there were people that I'd worked with over a period of 10 months that were no longer in that scene and no longer part of that group that I'd hadn't seen for a while, and just realizing the thing that we'd done, which is a tiny percentage of what these guys had gone through, incomparable really, but just the scale of what we'd done and achieved together, and that we'd actually made it was really at the forefront of my mind, and that we'd all done it together. And the journey that he's gone on, you know, he's finally potentially going home. He's finally done the thing. He's finally got out of the hole. He's finally got out of the darkness. He reminded me of, I was in a zoo once, and I saw a polar bear that was going crazy, pacing back and forth and had clearly lost his mind. And, Egan reminded me of that whole sequence of him being in the POW camps, reminded me of that polar bear, and it was almost as if this guy was about to go home. And what does that mean? What does that feel like? And we'd all done it together, and I think they probably felt the same.
Just like the sense of freedom,
relief
yeah.
That they survived, and then the traumas that were about to hit him like a bus, you know, and having to look at himself again.
Mm-hmm.
And there's that great scene that Dee Rees wrote where he says, I don't know who I am anymore. I don't recognize myself.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know who I'm going home to, and I don't have anyone to go home to. So why am I still alive? You know, and that's a lot to deal with.
How do playing these characters affect you personally? Even though it's been, like I said, a couple years since you wrapped, obviously they're still close to your heart. Tell me about like the after effects of it.
I mean, they were known as the golden generation.
Right.
So it's something that then is embedded inside of you. I feel that we don't have anymore, and they had in abundance, and I hope that I was able to take on some of that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's always sort of like things that stick around in your psyche finishing any job, but particularly one that, you know, we shot this, took a year to make. You know, it was an incredibly immersive experience from top to bottom. And I still, I guess, stand kind of in awe of Rosie and his story and what he ended up, you know, accomplishing even after the war. And you know, there's still times that I look back and just think, you know, what an amazing human being. Feel lucky to have been able to, you know, sort of symbolically shake his hand, if you will.
Yeah.
Also, the joy of being an actor is that 3 weeks later you're doing another thing. So 3 weeks later I was training to be a rower.
You didn't see Boys in the Boat.
In the boat.
Yes.
That's a plug for that movie.
But just a coincidence that you played back-to-back American heroes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It is. But it's a role that you carry with you, I would imagine. You know, you can't take it lightly that you played John Egan, you know, so yeah. And so tell me, have you watched the series?
I watched it. Yeah, I watched the show that we made.
Some actors don't like to watch themselves. So are you?
This one I definitely wanted to see. I mean, I come in the fourth episode, so there were a few things early on in the show that I never saw. I wasn't there when we made them, you know. And it's always, especially with a show like this, where there's so. I mean, it took a couple years for all the special effects to be put in. So until you see that, you just don't know what it's going to be like. So I was so psyched to be able to see, you know, what they were able to put together. Some stuff in it that I think is just incredible.
I mean, it was a very extensive production, to say the least. And right, having Spielberg and Tom Hanks and Gary Gatzman involved in it from Band of Brothers, you know what you're going to get. But even knowing that, it must have sort of, I imagine, exceeded your expectations in a lot of ways.
It blew my mind. And, you know, the beauty of having those guys as the leaders is that you get people like Colleen Atwood, who was our costume designer. I mean, she's won 4 Oscars. There's Mike Minkler, who did the mix. He's won about 5. You know, you're working with heavyweights, and you just feel like you're in the safest hands that you could ever imagine, really.
And then you mentioned it earlier, but you have talked to some World War II survivors since then, veterans. They showed up to some of them showed up to the premiere, right?
Yeah, in LA. Yeah, there were a few. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, is this a case where you're constantly still learning even after the production is over and the series is on the air, that you're still learning about what happened during that time?
Absolutely. I mean, there's so much there that I mean, you know, the story of the Tuskegee Airmen, like particular. I mean, there are just so many aspects of that story that just are so incredible and mind-blowing. And we're meeting those veterans. I mean, we got to meet at the premiere. They stood up and we got to, you know, and Tom Hanks had this sort of like beautiful kind of ode to them before the episode started. And you know, if we could do anything to kind of make them proud, you know, that you know, that of course means a great amount.
yeah, as an actor, you're in service of the thing that's bigger than you, which is the story. And to get the recognition from the guys that actually went through it personally, and they give you the thumbs up, is a beautiful thing. And actually, it's a relief.
Yeah.
Because you haven't screwed up their legacy. John Egan's daughters were there. Like you said earlier, he died when he was 45 or 42 or something. And we had an emotional moment. And it was very sweet. And yeah, I don't know. I felt protective of them. I don't know. I just felt protective of them that they were my daughters.
Right.
I said, don't stay out too late. Don't do anything I wouldn't do.
I imagine they've been waiting a long time to see their dad's story be told. Yeah. Wow.
They were really taken aback by it. So it's just a really beautiful thing when that happens.
I am sure. What an experience. So before we go, I'm not sure if this was the first time you have all seen this episode or have you seen it a couple times, but what should, I think this is the kind of series that's going to stand the test of time. And when we do watch it again, is there like a special kind of takeaway that you would want people to know beyond the sacrifice that these men made?
What we did was honor their story and honor what they went through. And I think it's important to remember what they went through, because there are a lot of people that there aren't many people that have the memory of World War II. And so you have to keep reminding people. And I think that's an important part.
That's true.
Of the show.
There was also something you were asking about, sort of like things we learned in the process of making it afterwards. I mean, there was one thing that was illuminating for me when we started working on it, was just this very collective sense of duty, right? That it wasn't beyond, like we sort of live in a world now that's very, very polarized, right? And we have trouble comprehending a sense of a shared collective goal, right? Mm-hmm. And the day after Pearl Harbor, it was like, I mean, Rosie talked about like going to his friends' houses and being like, did you guys, like, have you gotten your letter? All of just this. I remember like sitting in traffic before we started and like looking around in all the cars, and it would be like if all of these people were going to enlist right now. Like it was just a tremendous force. Perhaps that's important to keep in mind.
It's true. It does seem like it's not even 100 years ago, and it's hard to believe that. I know, and they're dwindling away. Well, listen, it's a remarkable series. You guys were incredible in it. Congratulations. Masters of the Air streaming on Apple TV+. Thank you so much.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you.